All right, Brent. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate this. It means a lot to me. I've gotten to take a good look at some of your work over the years. Back when I was at Brand Hall Group, and I was always just blown away with sort of the thought and the vision that you put into our topic for today, which is learning strategy. I rarely have seen so much effort go in, but still presented in a way that makes complete sense. I've seen a lot of effort turn into a lot of nonsense. So I really do appreciate you taking some time, and hopefully listeners will glean some insights from your thoughts. But yeah, welcome.
Well, thanks, David. And I'll tell you, I appreciate you sharing part of your day with me. And again, accolades to you for all you've done, with your podcast and leveraging the expertise that you have around you and through your networks and helping to advance the learning function across the globe. So I appreciate that.
That is the goal, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, I kind of want to just jump in here because you are such a great resource for this sort of stuff. But I keep going back to the years that I was doing the advisory work and the analyst work and talking to organizations about their learning strategy, and I was always amazed by the actual lack of a coherent learning strategy. I think when you talk to people about, well, oh, okay, your organization's learning strategy, I think a lot of L&D leaders, they sort of internalize. They think, yes, there's a strategy in my head of things that I want to happen and things that I want to do. But a lot of organizations don't have an actual thought out planned strategy. Am I missing something here, or am I correct in that?
No, you're exactly right. And we could spend the entire time just talking about that one simple problem. And again, when we talked about doing this together, I thought back and I said, I was working with the government back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I remember I wrote a strategy. It was for INS at the time, that's Homeland Security now, but it was the Immigration Naturalization Service. And I wrote their plan in 1990 for their global future of work and learning strategy. So, I mean, it was funny to see where we've come so far today, but also where we've not come very far from, 30 plus years ago, almost 35 years ago.
Yeah.
So to your point, I've done this and I was blessed to be at Shell where I had a lot of background in strategy. And before I came to Shell, I did a lot of strategy. But what I found is people don't know how to do a strategy. And like Shell was great at scenario planning, looking at alternatives, visioning out, looking at different paths that the world can go into and the workforce can go into. And what I developed when I was there is really when I did strategies, I did them based on archetypes. And every company has a type of archetype. So, for example, there's innovating companies like Google and Apple and Tesla. And it's really important for them to have a learning strategy that embraces who they are when they hold that mirror and say, what do we want to be? And how can we use learning and people to get us there in terms of innovative products, services, and their culture around all that? Then you have companies like that are stewards, and stewards are very stable companies. They're like the government, the military. They know what they do. They want to keep doing it consistently, and they're not really great innovators, but they're stabilizers. So, we want the government to be very stable, more so than innovative. So the learning strategy for that kind of archetype would be different. Same thing with like visionaries, like SpaceX. When you talk about that, they're going to put multi planetary exploration on the map. How do they want to build a learning culture for their people? And it goes on and on and on. Whether it's like think tanks they're dealing about and all those kind of things, and even like you go on to like the pragmatic folks like Amazon or Walmart and retail chains. So every one of these has an archetype, and you have to start your strategy discussions based on who are you as a company? What is your thing? Are you a collaborative company? Are you a deal making company? You're like LinkedIn or like the United Nations, or are you an analyzing company? Do you just have with data science and healthcare, and you're dealing with analytics and finance and numbers and metrics? So you have to first say who am I, and then start from there on your basic archetype.
Mm. Yeah, you hit on something that always came to me over the years. You can talk about things philosophically from a research standpoint, conceptually, but ultimately, people say, "Well, what are other companies doing?" And it was always amazing to me that, especially, give say 10 years ago, people always want to say, well, what is Google doing? Because they were at the
Right.
time like the hip happening, the place to be, right? And everybody, well, and from every facet of HR, well, what is Google doing? I was like, well, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Are you Google? Because I don't think
Yeah.
what they're doing is going to necessarily work for what you're doing, but they think of like, well, this is a great currently, whatever successful, innovative company. We want to be like that. And it's like, well, I think you're right. They missed this opportunity to say maybe it should align more with what the organization's doing. And I think that's the other thing that you highlight there is that um, don't just think I'm going to create this learning strategy in some sort of vacuum that's only focused on learning and how learning should happen. It's about learning within that whole organization. So what's the overall strategy of the organization? Does the learning strategy fit into there? Do you think that happens to, like, okay, we stepped away from no strategy at all, and now we're into, okay, we're thinking about strategy. You think companies still have a lot of work to do with connecting the learning strategy to the business strategy?
Definitely. I mean, the first thing when I go to a big multinational company and they want me to help them develop their global learning strategy, the first thing they want to say is, what are other people doing? And I'll give them the data because I work with a lot of them, whether it be NASA or the military or nuclear, all these higher risk entities. You got to remember when an organization is at much higher risk, their training has to be much more deliberate, much more authentic in terms of being assessed, being objective based, all those kinds of things. So there's not a lot of compromise in their outcomes. And so I'll give them, I say, look, this is what NASA's doing, and that's great. And this is what Facebook or Google's doing or Amazon. And that's all neat, cool stuff. But more than important than what they're doing is how are they executing? Because you, as a big multinational, your problem fundamentally isn't really in your strategy because you really don't have any at all. It's really in your basic fundamental execution of what you do today. So I try to help them see the light to say, you don't even have you don't run training like a business. It's always run like a cost center. There's nobody really held accountable because what we've done in corporations today is we've used this SME model to make SMEs learning people. So if you're a good operator or you're a good salesperson or you're a good this, and you're ending your career, maybe you want a career change, they'll put you in learning and they become hobbyists or, you know, well-intended gifted amateurs, as we would call it, and they're not really learning professionals, and it creates this vicious cycle because the business leaders think, well, that's George was just an operator, I was an operator, now George is in learning, I know as much about learning as George does, so George has no credibility. And George is trying hard to learn learning and figure out objectives and different things, but they're just not um, classically trained learning professionals. And so what you find is you have all these organizations have built their learning departments of hundreds of people on people that aren't true professionals. So they wouldn't even know a good learning strategy if they were reading it most often. So I mean, this is some of the problems that we face.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me almost of the manager dilemma where someone gets really good at what they do, and so the only natural next step is to become a manager of those kinds of people, where that person may
Yeah,
have zero interest or capability to do that. I was,
yeah,
I play drums. I think I'm pretty good at it. I could not teach another person how to do it. I know that of myself. I've tried it. I'm not good at it. I won't do it again. I won't put anybody else through that. So, yeah, this idea that, well, if you're really good at something, you have a lot of knowledge, you're a subject matter expert, you should then be able to train people on how to do that is definitely a roll of the dice at best, right?
right. And
Um,
then, by the way, I mean that's one of my bugs is this whole. I believe that in the future we're going to see leadership as a profession, and people will go to universities for 4-year degrees in just being a leadership, and we'll get away from this stigma that I have to be an expert in tax management to be a tax management director or leader. And I think we're finally going to realize because of this human centricity in the workplace that it's more important that it's a good fundamental leader and they focus on leadership rather than multitask and get pulled and distracted by their day job because
mhm.
organizations quite honestly don't say to most leaders go just be a leader. They're saying go be a leader and go to meetings and
Right.
do this and do that. So I think there's got to be a fundamental paradigm shift, because you're seeing this in engagement scores, you're seeing it in attrition rates and retention rates. So I mean, this is one of the big things that we need to address, just like the learning dilemma, where we're putting people that really aren't great learning professionals in these roles.
Yeah. So, do you think that it's possible? Because here's my one of my gut reactions to that is I would agree, but then I think will we be able to overcome people's natural inclination to say, well, why would I listen to you? You don't know what it's like to do what I do. Right. There
Right.
is this inherent thing with people where if a manager or somebody in leadership comes from maybe even outside the organization, there's this inherent thing of, well, you don't know what we do. You don't know what I do. How could you be the leader? But I think what you're saying is true, but do you think it's possible to overcome that? Will it just take
Yeah,
time?
I mean, it's similar to the dilemma we have today. When you want to make a big global transformation, people, and I did this all of my career, and I would go to people and I said, look, you're going to tell me 4 or 5 things. You're going to say, we tried that before and it didn't work. You're going to tell me we're unique and that won't work under our constraints and circumstances and all of our problems. You're going to say, all the reasons why it can't be done, because everybody is so distinctive and unique, whether it's their product
Oh yeah.
coming in for input, it's different, it's a higher viscosity, it's this or that. And so they're always going to come up with those rationales to separate themselves and make them feel separate and unique. But we're coming into this world where it's more about the diversity of thought, the diversity of opinion, where yes, I rely on you to be my technical expert, but this is a leadership issue, and I'll take your input and let's process it, and we're going to have a better way. Because I think leadership's going to shift from this, uh, patriarchal, father, son, parent, child,
Right,
mother,
right.
daughter relationship, to it's going to be a more matrix kind of way that organizations get things done.
Yeah. I would hope so. I think, and it's, I would agree that it's moving that way, albeit probably somewhat slowly. Um,
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's my impatience with the industry today, is we do have things move so slow.
well,
You know,
but folks like you in the work that you do, you have to push hard and want to happen fast so that it will happen slowly, right? I think if you take these approaches like, well, we know change is hard, so we'll take this. You need people pushing harder and further forward so that there's room to make the incremental change. So I think I think it's all good.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's also good with this idea, this concept from Google that came about, moonshot thinking. In the last 10 years of industry four, we were all about innovation. Innovation is finding a novel way of doing something or looking at it from a different perspective, and it's getting more incremental results. And this moonshot thinking is about getting 10 times the result, do it 10 times faster, 10 times cheaper, 10 times better, smarter. And I think organizations are going to have to start moving to that kind of mindfulness.
mm. So coming back around to the overall learning strategy and sort of the state of things, you know, the next thing for me as we walk through this idea of how to think about it and that the sort of persona of the organization and fitting with that. What about just strictly from a learning strategy standpoint? uh, who should be involved in this process? Obviously, learning leaders feel like, yes, that I need to be setting this strategy, but does it change a lot depending on, like, you talked a bit about how every organization thinks they're unique and different, and trust me, I've seen that myself. Um, so does it change a lot of who should be involved in helping craft this learning strategy, or does it really matter, which organization it is?
Well, I think that you always want to start with the business goals and what are the greatest gaps in the organizations, what's going to really move the dot for the organization. And typically, I mean, if you look at the average organization today, they'll get together some kind of core team and then an extended team, and they'll go and send those people out to do interviews with the clients, the business leaders, to get stakeholder feedback on what do you think's working well and working not so well. And then what seems to happen is they come back and they aggregate all that opinion, and what they end up having is a lot of different opinions. People will say, "Well, I did competence management before. It's been done to me for 20 years, and I think it should look like this." And the next person says, "Well, I had it done to me this way, and I think I like that it was done like that." And I think what you get to is in the in the generation three, the industry three, people didn't have the power of cyber physical connectivity and data exchange. And so nobody, it used to always be, I'll standardize as long as you standardize my way. But that was an era when, you companies, like when Shell was trying to globalize, we spent 20 years of just trying to get global platforms, global processes, global data, and so that everybody could do things the same way, and you didn't have optionality. Well,
Yeah.
now we're in an era that we can say, well, you can have optionality. So if you want to do a content component management system and you want to do procedures and you have a template and you have all your procedural content from 65 sites in that database, every site can go and pick and choose what they want to see on their procedures on their iPad or their
Hmm.
their phone. So I think the era of we're unique and we don't do it that way here. We use different pumps. Our pumps are older. All these kind of things. That's going to get kind of flattened out because of the data that's available today. Will say I can personalize things because, as you know, um, we are in this era of Gen Z, high concept, high touch solutions, personalization, and every company's fighting for that because of this, the distraction, the lack of attention, the content shock, and people are so washed with things to do. I mean, people are distracted what every 7 minutes or something from their core task. So I think we're going to get to this era in learning that learning is going to be integrated with the actual work. And this is one of the things I've been working on is how do I take, because here's what's happened in learning. Learning's been the stepchild. So all these companies have been doing this: cyber physical, industry four, 9 pillars of technology innovation, sensors, drones, cloud, all this stuff. Well, learning's been sitting here lonely in the silo with their static PowerPoint slides and their redundant learning materials and all this
Hmm.
stuff. And now a worker in the field says, "Hey, I'm Sheila. I'm out in the field by pump number 9. I've got my iPad, and the incoming sensor data and drone data is telling me all this. Well, I need the procedure." Well, I've got to go back to the control room to get the paper binder that has the procedure in it, or the learning manual, or whatever manual,
Yep.
because learning hasn't kept up with cyber physical connectivity of its data. And so, what learning has to do is enable an ecosystem where there's a fair exchange and reception of data. So, they can feed from Industry 4 dynamic real time data and learn from it. And the people in the field can pull from legacy data that enhances what they're seeing in the field.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's got to be that two-way exchange.
Sure. You hit on something that's near and dear to me. I use the term learner all the time. It's just a great shorthand to sort of talk about people within the context of what we do as learning professionals. But I'm also torn because I very strongly believe that calling somebody a learner is redundant. As a human being, we're all learners at any given moment. And if within the context of the work and the business, if we keep referring to people as learners, we have already said that this person is now somebody else now that I've got their attention, right? Like you've conceded that the entire process of learning is separate from the job because now they are a learner. And
Right.
the idea is, like you said, it's like while you're working, not only should learning be part of the work, it's the work, it's the job. I use this application, I use this software to do my job. Learning should be just one other of those things that helps me do my job and do it better, and just trying to crack that mindset of we can talk about learning in the flow of work and reaching people where they need the learning, but just conceptually the idea that all the stuff we're doing isn't separate from the work that people are doing. It is the work that they're doing.
I mentioned that paper that I did like 35 years ago. And in that paper, I said the objective of the learning function must be to bring the world of work and the world of learning seamlessly together, that they become one. You don't want the distance between those two things to be miles. You don't want to say, well, I'm at work. I can't get that training program for 6 months and it's in 5 states north of me. So
Yeah.
to your point, and this is this whole thing about the anatomy of work, and this is what we've got to fix because human beings are disgusted with the anatomy of work. How much the percentage of time they're in unnecessary meetings, poorly conducted meetings, they get redundant work, unnecessary work, problems they can't solve, and they have to wait on situational data or responses or decisions and things like that. And just imagine if you took all that waste, which is about 60% of a person's day, because this is why the people only really are productive like 4 hours a day, because 60% of their time is in the bad anatomy of work. Just think if you could change that to say, no, because we got all this real time data. And remember, every person, every day when they're on the job, they're learning,
Mhm.
because this is how you get experience, and you learn through experience. So you become a novice, then you're a beginner, then you're competent, and then you're advanced, and you're an expert. Well, while you're running that journey up the flagpole, you should be documenting what you're learning, capturing it, and sharing it. And the thing I predict also in the future will be, we're going to be able to have systems that better capture not only explicit and implicit knowledge, but tacit knowledge. And
Mhm.
that's what people really going to get paid for, is how much tacit knowledge do they give back to the organization through their own learning.
Yeah, yeah, the ability to capture that stuff as it, you know, surfaces is obviously getting so much better than it ever was. Do you think that there's any chance that, um, you talk about sort of this, um, the anatomy of work and some of this wasted effort? Is it better now that there's more remote work, or is it worse? Like I'm not sure. I don't know if I know the answer, because I think there are times now that everyone's virtual that will pull people together in a Zoom call or a Zoom meeting or something, um, because that's the only way to get them together. Whereas maybe if they were together physically together, they wouldn't have needed that. Or is it, when we do come together, it's more meaningful because it's a Zoom? I'm not sure yet. I don't know if you have an opinion, but do you think that that issue gets worse or better as the sort of makeup of how work is done has changed?
So, if you read some of the recent articles on this, impending Chat GPT 5 coming out, and everybody's really worried about what it's going to do to work and all those things, I embrace the automation coming into the human society and the industrial society, because it should get rid of the dull, dirty, dangerous, demanding, you know, work. And we don't want people doing that. We want them out of harm's way. So, what I think is going to happen is, as automation increases and we start to integrate humans with more automation and data and insights, people's the power skills of what we call them. But I think there's three core power skills. People are going to have to be more um, cognitive or intellectual in their thinking, because they're going to have multiple sensory sources of data and insights coming at that they have to learn how to make sense out of, and the
Mm.
scenarios will get more complex and just a bit more intense. They're going to have to also be, because of the way organizations are going from hierarchical to more matrix, they're going to have to learn how to be more collaborative, because now you're just not working with the hydrocracker or the olefins unit at Shell. You're working in a network that there's 16 olefins units across Shell, and we want a company to learn from all 16 of those units, not the one that Amy and Phil and Joyce work on.
Right.
So we want to do that. And the next thing that they've got to do is, because if we're going to continue, automation will take care of productivity. But humans are going to take care of the creativity and the ongoing innovation to get us to this industry 5, where we're really looking at ways to improve supply chains and eliminate waste and create a more circular economy, and have a more altruistic society of work, where industry isn't just about companies. It's about an ecosystem of industry, and what does it do for the GDP of countries, and what does it do for the perpetual sustainability of a workforce and the
Mm.
growth of a workforce. Because this is the problem that companies are having. They're losing people. They can't keep people. The jobs that are now in some organizations in manufacturing are paying $20 an hour. Well, people are getting a lot of other alternatives for a higher rate, and also
Mhm.
more autonomy. So this is something that industry has to look at, is the composition of the jobs, and especially in lower wage areas like manufacturing, and how do we increase the wages in manufacturing with more cognitive, creative, and collaborative work, while we're increasing productivity and cost management with automation. So I
Yeah.
mean, these are some. So yeah, I think we're going to have to do it if we want to have a GDP that, we're at 8.2 billion people, I think, by 20, I don't know, I think it's 2030, 2035, we're going to be at 11 something million people. We have to
Mm.
find jobs for, um, three and a half more million people. And, they can't all be low wage jobs. So
Yeah.
yeah, we're going to have to uh, shift the job bank.
Yeah, and that's obviously the fear that comes up whenever you start to talk about things like automation. People are like, well, what about the jobs? And look, let's be honest, there are going to be jobs that just don't exist, and that's just the nature of it. And so you talk about these other kinds of skills that are sort of irreplaceable. I would add one to it, and I'm not saying that you need to expand it, but to me, you talked about that first thing, the idea of being able to take in all of this complex information from a lot of different places and be able to synthesize that. I would say that the adjacent skill to that is then, can I then communicate those thoughts in a coherent, understandable way to a wide variety of audiences? I think that is like first of all, a very scarce skill, unfortunately, and also one that automation isn't necessarily going to replace. I think, right now, things like a chat GPT and a Bard and some of these others, they'll do a good job of synthesizing information and presenting it to you in a way. But I think being able to have that skill set that you described of understanding all of these different systems, it's then being able to, turn around and make sense of it externally. It's one thing to make sense of it to yourself and move on with your life, but to be able to externally make it make sense for other people, I think is critical.
Yeah, and I think we've created this society where the aspiration for so many has been go to the best university you can and get the best degree you can, and that makes you a success. Well, I think the Gen Zers are coming out and they say, "Well, I would trade going to Harvard to a lesser known school, but to leave that school with no debt." And that's what they're thinking.
Yeah.
And the other thing they're thinking, I want a job that I have a livable wage, but I have a livable life. And I'm not killing myself to this aspiration to climb the ladder at the cost of my health, my mental health, my physical health, all these things in exchange for progression. So I think you're seeing this change here. So I think we're going to see a new economy and industry where there's a segment of people that aspire to be, college graduates or higher, but then there's going to be an increase in the trades where manufacturing companies are going to have more um, uh, jobs that are more trade orientated, but more in conjunction with automation. And that's so this is I think this is what you're going to see. It's just like the evolution of jobs today. We used to never have a chief digital officer. I'm pressing for companies to have chief connection officers that scan over HR and IT and operations and say, I'm looking at the connection of the entire enterprise.
Hmm.
So we've got a lot of jobs today, and I still tell people in this shift to digitization and why 70+% are failing is because they're not set up for it. They're still operating like they're in the 1990s, trying to do reengineering, business process reengineering projects, and not digital transformation projects, which are much more complex, much more cognitive, creative, and collaborative.
Hmm.
So I think organization, that's what I tell people, because a lot of times they'll tell me, well, we can't do this strategy because we don't have this, we don't have that. I know it's also not 1990, and it takes a different mindset. It takes a different resource set to actually succeed, or we're going to still see the 70+ failure rate in all these digital transformation investments.
Yeah. Boy, you really kind of clicked off a light bulb for me there with the idea of this a chief connection officer, just the concept there, because you're right. So often in the past, you talk about, oh, digital transformation of the organization. So you go into the organization and they say, okay, you guys are going to digitally transform, and you're going to digitally transform,
Right.
and you're going to digitally transform, and magically that's all going to work together. Or, hey, we need more alignment, and we hear it all the time. I mean, I'm clearly coming from an L&D perspective, but one of the biggest issues in L&D is the inability to align it with the business. But every part of the business needs to align. You hear it all the time. We need better alignment between this and this, and everybody says yes, we all do, and each of these groups thinks about how they could better align, but there really isn't any sort of accountability for that alignment, right? Like, who's ultimately
Right.
responsible for that to happen? And I think you've
Right.
sort of hit on
And this
something.
is and I know you work with a lot of big vendors and things, and this is one of my problems with, we have this codependent relationship because I might go into a big multinational company. I'll say, who's in charge of your connected worker program? And I get crickets. And somebody will say, well, maybe it's HR. Well, maybe it's IT. Well, maybe it's operations. And nobody really has the baton. And then I asked them, well, what platforms are you using? Well, they have like 9 different platforms for procedure management, and 9 for this, and 6 LMSs that they're using. And it's just a mess because there isn't anybody that's shepherding the enterprise. And so in that, what happens is, like, there might be a manager of an operations and a vendor takes them out to lunch to do some procedure tool or something. And the vendor can control getting that procedure tool into their site, but he can't control, or she can't control, getting that across 15 sites. And the vendor also realizes it's really easier for me to make this $50,000 sale and do this point solution for single point solution than it is for me to stand back and say, wait a minute, let's be more strategic and let's get this platform across your entire enterprise because there's benefits. And so, because they don't have that meeting of the minds, because it's easier for both of them, we still would stick with these little micro pilots or proof of concepts. And this is why we're in this analysis, pilot paralysis, and we can't get out of it because we don't have that big, chief connection engineer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely something to explore. Although I don't think right now orgs are interested in adding another C-suite person, but I think it could solve a lot of the underlying issues that we've just been describing. I think that's something to start to think about for sure. Um, so I wanted to just kind of circle back again to, we were talking about the different types of organizations and the way they should think about strategy. One thing that I've always found in the research that I've been doing is, um, let's say a company finally does, commit to creating a learning strategy, and for good or bad, they've done a great job of whatever it is. Um, they then kind of walk away from it, like it's etched in stone, and that's the thing. Do you see that are companies doing a good job of revisiting the learning strategy, and then B, what kind of cadence frequency should there be?
Well, I think that companies are in learning strategy. Again, I'll use the word again, paralysis. They're always doing a learning strategy. I mean, it seems like
Yeah,
it's always on the table and they're never getting great results from it. And it's because organizations, I don't think they don't look at the learning function as an engineering school of science. They look at it most times, anybody can get in there, anybody can do it. I mean, I don't go and do finance tax for BP or Exxon because I wouldn't know what I was doing, and I wouldn't want them to want me to do that. And so it's this cobbler's shoes kind of thing, because learning kind of is in the back office, it's ancillary, it's viewed as discretionary. Just kind of keep our costs down, keep the people happy when on the employee engagement surveys, and they're not looking at more meaningful metrics to hold the learning function accountable to. So they're saying, what's your learning budget? Are you staying on budget? Okay, we're getting employee surveys and they don't think they're getting developed, or they don't think they're getting coached, or they don't think they're getting this, or leadership scores are bad. And they're looking at these really softball metrics. And I don't think that the Gen Zers and the millennials that are going to make up 50+% of the workforce here in a couple of years are going to sit for that, you know.
no,
So, yeah, so I think there's got to be a much more disciplined approach, and it's got to be much more run like a business that must deliver credible results that are tangible.
sure. I mean, sometimes I want to talk to leaders and say, okay, let's look at your whatever industry you're in. All you hear about is change, right? The speed of business and everything's changing. It's always been changing, but yes, it just seems to change more rapidly and more dramatically now. So the question is, okay, as your organization sits today, are you going to hire your way through the changes, right? If the business
Mhm.
changes, if the industry changes, the market changes, will you be able to hire people to adapt to those changes? And the answer is no. You can't hire you. You can do it to some degree and change the makeup of the organization, but you're not going to consistently be able to constantly hire new people, which would mean, are you going to shed other people to match these new demands? So then what else is there? And that's where learning comes in, right? It's like, okay, how are you going to change the way your organization looks and operates to meet these new demands? That is going to require learning and development. And you know, it's strange to me when you start to think about it that way. You don't get, but you're right that a lot of orgs think about it in this more sort of HR focused, discretionary sort of thing, right, as opposed to strategic.
Right. Yeah. And I'll tell you, one of the things I always liked, and at Shell, we would do a lot of risk assessments. And I really like to propose this to the whole learning industry, especially with the digitization stage. We go to, to static content, to dynamic digital content, to smart content, those three levels. And at Shell, I remember I used to be in charge of HR information. and part of the HR information was learning. And the auditors would put a value in Shell's learning content. Was it accessible? Was it accurate, accessible and available? Was it accurate? And was it being maintained? Or, different characteristics like that. And they actually put a cost on it. To say what this is what learning content in this organization is worth. This is what our explicit, our implicit, and our tacit knowledge is worth. And you manage that as an asset, and you put value to it. And then you say, well, look, I've curated in the CCMS all of our content, our knowledge content. And guess what? We had 4,500 concepts that we need Shell people to know. Do we have those concepts rendered and illustrated or animated in a way that's everybody learns the same way, and porosity and Shell gets explained one best way, and people can get it in a little 8-minute, 6-minute nugget, and they can search and pick on their own what they want. And so, this is the thing we've got to switch the learning venue to. Is there's two things. There's learning people manage the knowledge in the organization, whether it's declarative, conceptual, or procedural, and then they manage skill development. And the skill development is pretty simple. Are they intellectual skills? Are they physical skills? Or are they behavioral skills? And there's a certain way to do that. And that's what I try to, when I work with clients, I try to look, we're going to build a box, because organizations oftentimes don't let people in learning put their stuff in a box to say there's a definite top, bottom, side to side, because they always say, well, we don't have 800 concepts. I'm going to go home tonight and think of 4 more we can add in. And this is what we've got to do as learning professionals: say, no, we've curated and rendered, we've built competency frameworks that tell us the requisite skills, knowledge, and tasks and things that we have to do. And we've curated them, we've housed them, we're the custodians of them, and we're constantly improving them.
Yeah.
And that's what we've got to get to in the learning function if they're really going to add value. Because what I want to be able to say is there are 27,000 facts that BP needs to know. There's 6,000 concepts. There's 19,000 procedures, and we've got a handle on all of those. I can tell you they're all digitized. They're accurate. They have evergreening process where we look at them every 2 years. All those kind of things. So
Yeah.
we just need a better ecosystem for learning people to operate within, and I think digitization is going to make that happen.
I would hope so. I would say that, you mentioned the paralysis piece. I would argue that there are organizations, learning functions, learning leaders that have convinced themselves that they're being agile when they're really in that state of paralysis, right? That inability to commit to something. They're able to tell themselves, well, we're just being agile because we're ready for anything. When meanwhile, it's really just chaos with no really set, plan. I think to be able to have some sort of foundational aspect to what you do, and then figure out what changes to make to be agile to meet the needs of the business. But I think, yeah, you sort of described it well with that paralysis of how frequently do we come back and look at the strategy. It's constantly in flux, and it's like, well, is it constantly in flux, or is it just constantly a mess?
Right.
And like, you have to be honest
And
with
you
yourself.
said it. That's it. Because they never have, in my opinion, the tenacity to land it and to be evaluated against it. And because they hold back, it never really gets implemented. I remember, some companies, they were talking about, well, we're going to have anytime, anywhere, any device learning. It's going to be mobile. It's going to be accessible. It's going to be relevant. And we're going to do A, B, C. And they said that 9 years ago. And they're still talking about it.
Oh yeah.
So because again, like if we were going to build a platform at Exxon or BP or Shell or somewhere, we'd have a plan, we'd have a master project plan, and we would build that platform. And I think the learning community has to look at that the same thing. We're going to build a platform of learning, and it's going to work. There's going to be gears that turn. There's going to be pumps that swivel. There's going to be all kinds of things, and they're all going to do what they're supposed to do. And that's what that learning function has to do. They have to build that platform that actually produces oil.
Yeah, perfect. Um, so one of the things about like being agile or being able to respond to the business, it just comes up in all of the work I've done around strategy, is this idea of governance models. And companies really struggle. They ask all the time, what should I do? Right. So there's sort of a learning governance model that is, federated, or there's
Mhm.
one that's very centralized, and there's decentralized. Then there's sort of a hybrid, and I definitely see this trend towards the desire, at least, for more hybrid. But is that more of the same, like sort of embracing chaos and saying, well, it's a hybrid governance model, meaning there's none, or is that a real thing?
Well, I mean, it depends on your business strategy. Like again, I said in Shell for 20 years, I my job was to globalize HR and learning, and that was again the standard platform, blah blah blah. And now, because of their business model, and again, some companies drive this more. So, for example, a Shell might say today, "Well, we worked all that time for 20 years to try to get one big company, one
Mm,
enterprise first, group." And then now they look at it because the business has changed in 20 years. Maybe Shell's worth more money broken up. Maybe if they sell off this and sell off that. So now they want to have a capacity in their learning functions to be separate. And again, the digitization allows for that, this federated model or this, it used to be high centralization and small decentralization. And
yeah,
now I see what a lot of companies want is they want more site autonomy or more business unit autonomy. And again, I think that's the adaptive is because businesses today must be more adaptive. They must be ready to be bought, to be sold, to be merged, to be migrated, or just broken apart or pieced
yeah,
together. And so I think just like Henry Ford's interchangeable parts and Eli Whitney's interchangeable parts and assembly lines, that's what they want in these companies. So it's kind of come full circle again that we want to be able to mix and match different pieces of companies.
yeah,
And the same thing with the reskilling. I mean, again, reskilling and upskilling were such a big term, but for 7, 8 years, companies just sat on that concept, hoping that somebody in the closet was working on it.
yeah,
And now we're seeing I want with a digital push of a button, and what I want is I want that and what I think everybody should have is every connected worker should have a personalized, connected worker assistant. And it's AI driven. It's based on what tasks they do, what procedures they complete. It based on their operational data, the HR data, and their subjective opinion data. And it's always learning. And it's saying, hey, Brent, you just learned 3 new skills today you never did. Or, hey, you haven't done this skill in 9 months. Do you remember how? You want a little nudge learning. And it gets smart and it can start to not only understand what the individual's upskilling, reskilling needs are, but it can aggregate the entire enterprise's upskilling and reskilling needs. Because you kind of got this little gizmo like from Fred Flintstone and Company, if you remember that little a spaceman that's watching over everybody, and he can or she can see everything, aggregate it, and say, "Hey, these are the trends we're seeing. We've got to start upskilling people in these areas."
yeah, yeah. I mean, so a few things. One, I think yes, reskilling, upskilling, conceptually been around for a while. A lot of talk. Haven't seen it materialize into something in a lot of instances. I haven't seen a lot of concrete instances where somebody took that as from a concept to a thing that actually happens. I agree with you there. The other thing is, well, and I have to mention it. We went 41 minutes before you actually said AI, so that's a record on my podcast. You did mention
I know.
ChatGPT, you mentioned automation, but we made it 41. I'm impressed. You're the winner so far, but it has to be brought up every time. So I appreciate that. And speaking of things like AI, I want to bring us to our prediction segment because that's obviously future looking. So the choice here for you at prediction time is we can look at a prediction that was made that should have already come true, and we can decide whether or not it has. Talk about why or why not. A prediction that is yet to come true, like for later this year, maybe next year, and we can decide talk about whether or not we think it'll happen. Or the third option is I will let you make your very own prediction, and we can talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Well, I think I'll go for door number 3.
All right, let's
Um,
hear it.
And I think, and I'm going to base it on a couple of things. So I think your audience will all know some of these things that I mentioned. So I think, and I thought a milestone breakthrough report was obviously Josh Berson's with Deloitte, his 2014 study on the modern learner. I think after 10 years now, a decade that's been out, I think we can all agree that that's valid. It's right. We've all been chasing the attributes of the impatient, distracted, overwhelmed worker, and we all agree that we want anytime, anywhere, any device. We all agree on micro learning and self-directed and smart AI-driven learning and all that kind of stuff. But what I also see is we're moving from this idea of learner experience and centricity, and from passive learning to active learning. And we're seeing all these things come about because now we're enabled to do that. And so when I look at this again, just like the competency framework I told you, like I'll give you an example. Like when Shell was kind of separated early on and they weren't globalized, their problem from a business perspective was enterprises or business units weren't working well together. You had the upstream model, which was, they had deep, deep pockets, and the downstream model, they had, purse changes. And we were trying to globalize, and one wanted a 5-star gold plated solution, and one wanted, a paper box, and you were trying to merge that together. But I think now what can happen is we can harmonize all that. And this whole digitization bit, this content component management business allows us to do that. So you've got all these things coming in. You got the Gen Zers with their expectations, and all this stuff. You've got this idea that I call industrial pluralism, where we're moving from diversity, inclusion, equity it as a people related concept about the individuals to DE and I as the organization's DNA. That it's much more diverse in its thinking, how it operates, how it can operate, and all those things. So, and we're seeing this change in skills that I talked about. Moving to these power skills of they're more. And the other thing I'd say is I'm a big pusher in the learning function to go from competence development to whole person competence development, because we're losing people because they don't feel employable. Skills and knowledge, which companies always focused on competence, skills and all, that was for the company. What does the company want Joe to know? And Joe's like, well, that's great. I'm knowing everything the company wants to know, but I'm not developing myself really. And if we look at whole person competence, it exceeds skills by going to skills and knowledge, but it goes to behaviors, motives, traits, self image, and social role. And I believe companies have to start investing in the development of their people as a whole person, because they want to maximize and optimize the human, just not what they have as skill and knowledge for the company. Because again, when I did a lot of competence management, I could have two well engineers, both went to Oxford or Cambridge or whatever, both were the same age, had same fraternity, sorority, whatever. And there would be one that I'd love to work with, and the other one I'd run away if I saw him or her in the hall. And it was because not of their skill or knowledge, they were both equal. It was
Mm-hmm.
because of their social role in the organization. They liked to be helpful, not grumpy. Their motives were they wanted to advance the industry and make it greener. And the other one just wanted to get home and go lay on the couch or whatever it was. And so this is what we want to do as the future of work and the future of learning. So the future of learning is going to be a much more personalized experience that makes people employable. And I think you're going to see this relationship between I work for the company as long as they'll have me, till I work for the company as long as it's mutually prosperous. And I think we're going to get to that stage because of all these factors like the Gen Zers and things. They're not going to tolerate bad managers. They're not going to tolerate not developing and not having interesting, purposeful work. So, I mean, this is the thing we're seeing. And how does a learning organization fix that? And it fixes it with more personalized, higher touch, higher concept solutions that not only promote the individual and the development of the individual's creative, collaborative, and cognitive abilities, and it helps them do that. And it helps them do that by these personal assistants. So, I mean, I see that's kind of the future that I see. And I think it's coming sooner than later. If you've ever read a Neil Howells's book on like the fourth turning is coming, we're
Mm.
approaching by 2030 this fourth turn where you have the teacup of the world, technical, economical, political, operational, and commercial factors in the world start to converge to smash. And we're seeing that today.
Yeah.
And we're in the last stage, the last 10% of this next turn. So in about 2030, we're going to see a real upheaval in all these things. And it's going to require learning organizations to be ahead of that.
Okay.
And they're not even at the Burson level strategy yet. And that's
10 years. Yeah.
2014. And so
True.
I think that you're going to have real CLOs that are actual learning professionals or strategists that really figure this out, because they're not putting enough emphasis on classical learning, neuroscience, how people, perceive information, transfer information, all those things, and how strategic learning really is in a more adaptive society. And that's where we're at.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. I don't have an argument against you for that prediction. I think I would love to see it come to fruition sooner rather than later. But I do think, there's movement. I do hear about this stuff. And I think a lot of organizations are waking up to the fact that they don't just need to train people for the job that they do, right? This idea that, there was this fear of, well, why would I invest all this time developing someone just so they could go work somewhere else, right? The idea is, well, no, they're going to, people recognize the mutual benefits of this and they will stay longer. Yes, they may eventually leave, but even that's okay. And then anybody that leaves your organization, that is perhaps a future customer or at least an advocate, right? If
Yeah.
they are leaving under those circumstances, rather than you've abandoned me and I don't like it here anymore. Yeah, I think you're right. There has to be this focus on how do we make sure everyone's getting what they need, and and I mean that like all the way around, because there are people that will come to work every day and do the job and they're perfectly happy. They love the job that they do. They're good at it and that's what they want to do. And this, I think we get a little wrapped up in this idea that we have to grow everybody and put everybody on this development trajectory. And by taking that zero sum approach to it, then the people who are content with where things are feel as though they're being punished or looked down because they are happy. And then that has a negative impact. So it's being able to understand where people are, what they want, and being able to deliver that in the ways that you're describing. I think in that sort of more,
Yeah.
you say the word modern, and that already that feels outdated, right?
Yeah.
The word modern just seems like it's not even
Yeah.
useful anymore. But
And I'll give you one more, case. Like years ago, Shell, when they would hire a well engineer or whatever, they would, not really trust that person or take the training wheels off until after about 10 years. They wouldn't give them kind of autonomous, independent work to engineer and do themselves. They were
mm-hmm.
still helpers for 10 years because we don't trust you yet because I've been here 30 years and I know how it's being done. And then they found out, because of the great crew change in like 2012 and all that it no longer was sustainable. We can't wait for people to be 10 years before they're productive autonomously.
Yeah.
So they did a big program to cut that in half down to like 5 years, because they were seeing other smaller oil and gas companies were doing it. I mean, they were getting other people proficient in, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And I see now with the clients that I work with, that is even getting halved again. They're lucky if their people are there for 2 years. So, from a learning perspective, how do you onboard a person now? Because learning takes the onboarding. How do you get them qualified or proficient, and then get them to a payoff of productivity within so that 2 years it actually matters. So that they only lasted 2 years, but we got 18 months out of them, 15 months, because a lot of companies right now are maybe only getting 7 months out of them.
Yeah.
So again, this is something that the learning CLOs have to think about is, these are the kind of challenges that businesses are facing. And is learning at the table? Are they helping solve these problems? And are they offering, are they coming up proactively and saying, hey, we're looking at your data? I mean, that's one of the things I always did. I always looked at workforce data and I'd go, hey, I see the workforce trend here is an issue. And I think it's because of poor onboarding. And I've done a study that says, the likelihood of somebody going through a bad onboarding experience is 66% more likely to be gone within 6 months than if they had a good onboarding experience.
Oh, sure.
And so that's what I think the learning folks have to do, is really be data driven, business orientated, and saying we're here because it's about the people, and we help manage that human resource.
Yeah. And I think the last thing I'll leave it with is just to build on what you're saying. You talked about at the beginning of this prediction, though, this idea of active learning. And to me, when I hear that, I think of practice, right? The ability to sort of internalize the things that you think you know and actually do the things. And you talk about the cutting that 30-year, 20-year, 10-year, 5-year time in half in that particular industry, which obviously much longer tail. I can look at things like the restaurant industry, where you're hiring people in maybe their first job and they're learning the entire job during the onboarding process, and that is, we're talking weeks, right?
Right.
But it's the same attention of how do I get someone up and running so that I don't have to hold their hand and they're doing the thing, but they're also, it was done in a way that engaged them. They want to stay longer because that industry has huge turnover, and it's like, let's can we reduce it even by a little? And companies are having a success, like trying to
Right.
get in there early and start that. And so, and we have just been working on a research study here, looking at a bunch of different sort of frontline industries. And one of the biggest challenges they face is both from the employer saying this and the employees. We looked at both groups saying, I don't have the ability to practice. Like, you're telling me all these things. There's no opportunity for me to try it. And I think, would you agree that there's a shift maybe in what you're talking about for the future, active learning, the ability to give people more space to actually try the things that they need to know? I know it's different in like the industries you're working. Some of those
Right.
things,
No,
you can't
I mean,
necessarily
look,
practice.
if you look at some of the coolest action adventure movies where they're doing like military operations, and they're on the computer board and they're swipping with their fingers and they're practicing what they're doing, and they've got the active diagrams and they're simulating robbing a bank or doing this or breaking into that or whatever, and they're actively practicing. It's preparedness and readiness. It's a concept that I think we've lost a long time ago. But yeah, and I think the last thing I would say is, if you look at things like a Jiffy Lube at Shell. So, and this is where I think the learning people have to get their passion. Let's say the Jiffy Lube has super high turnover. People come in there to learn how to change people's oil, and they just can't keep them going. And the learning people can't get them trained fast enough that it makes hiring a human worthwhile. So what the operational strategists at Jiffy Lube did say, well, can we replace the human by automating how you change oil? And can I just have the car pull up and a robot comes and it takes the lug nut off and drains the oil and comes and fills the oil up and the human's out of the equation? Well, in my sense, as a classically trained learning professional, and I've done it all my career, I say that's a failing of the learning department. The learning department cost those jobs because we couldn't prepare them fast enough to keep them to be lucrative, that a human's more valuable than a machine in doing that. So I mean, these are the things that I think about, and I say this is what the learning people I think have to say. How are they helping the industries that they support?
Yeah, no, that's a good one to leave on, especially for future looking as people fear the robots taking over. How about we get all our people in a position where they can't be taken over? So,
Right.
um, I appreciate your time, Brent. This has been great. I love it. The way you look at things and the way you think about things, always interesting to me. So, yeah, I really appreciate your time.
All right. Well, thank you, David, and good talking to you.